Hello, welcome to the ADAMA Arts Salon edition number 31. I'm Floyd Hall, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Essé Dabla-Attikpo.
Hey,
How you doing?
really good with you.
I'm very well. So glad to have some time with you today. And really quickly, I want to let people know ADAMA is, of course, the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. And Adama has a handful of principles I think are really important. If you think about what a museum should be versus what they kind of currently feel like, Adama is really trying to step into that space. So we're talking about experiences, connection, learning, and amplification. And I think this art salon is an extension of all those principles. So I want to, center you in this conversation, but more so your origin story. Take us back to your upbringing and when did hip hop first become a theme in your world?
Okay, I'm trying to keep it short because that's a question I will not really know how to answer because there's so many elements. But basically, I was born and raised in France. My parents are from Benin and Togo, but they've been living more longer in France than on the continent now. Even though they go really regularly, like at least once a year, and they did very well to keep us in touch with the continent. So that's one side. And my big brother, I think it's from my big brother that I don't discover hip hop. He's older than me, and for me, I wanted to do everything that he does, everything that he is exploring. I also want to explore. And we have quite a big age difference. So when he went to study, I had access to his room, so I would just go and pick his CDs and listen to the music and stuff. But I also remember, I think he gave me also a CD that I could listen to over and over and over again. It was Nas, that is the yeah, so that's one of my memories. And then of course, because it was France, I have a lot of memories with that French hip hop artists. That's how it started, I guess.
And so you're based in Accra now.
Yeah.
And so you talk about some of those earliest memories of sort of digging through the crates, so to speak, with your brother's collection. I'm wanting to kind of maybe figure out like what were some of the themes that resonated with you that began to like bind you to the culture that really began to inspire
I don't think I thought about it that way.
you?
When I first started listening, I was quite young, you know, a teenager. It's more like, oh, I like the rhythm. Also, I'm very bad with lyrics. Like, there's some songs that I've been listening almost my whole life. If you ask me the lyrics, I can't sing them. So I don't really say that it's a topic, even if I have a general idea. But I'm really big into melodies and also representation. For me, it was also very important to see that Black people being so talented, especially in France. Like the rappers in France, the one I first got introduced to, they were really big intellectuals. Their texts were very deep. That's the kind of people you have to go to the dictionary and research what they're talking about. And that's something that's really important in my family. That my family is big on writing, literature. My dad writes, so and he teaches literature. So yeah, for me it was quite normal that with the relationship I had with the language, it was in aligning with that. So
Can you say more about this intersection of language and blackness as a bit of a comfort space or a safe space for you, or just even with your family?
that's a tough question actually, because for my parents, obviously French is not the first language. Um, but it has always been a particular relationship because you have to picture. I'm born and raised in a 15,000 inhabitants city of village, all white, and my dad is teaching French to the like people, you know, and it's kind of a remote area, and you have some areas in France where when it's a bit remote, the French is a bit different. Like everywhere else they have the countryside French, meaning that my family could be a black family speaking better French than the majority of people. So it's a bit of a weird relationship, but I don't think I really thought about it that way. It's more now that I'm playing a lot with language because I've been living in Ghana, which is an English-speaking country, and then also I there's so many other languages in presence in Accra. So you think about it a lot, like there are some people who speak the same language as my parents. And just when you're trying to translate or when you're lost, like that's maybe you're trying to communicate something and that's when the French word will come. Or another circumstance and that's the English word that will come. Another circumstance and that's my parents' language that will come. So I think it's really now that I'm more mature and that I'm navigating several spaces that I really have this different relationship with language and that I think more about the meaning and how language reflects the way you see the world. Like my parents they speak Ewe. In Ewe, yesterday and tomorrow is the same word. So that means a lot, you know. Yeah, I think it's just quite recent that I'm having this consideration, and I love it. I love playing with words. I love having this kind of questions and just understand. Oh wow, that's the way you say it, and that's what it means. Like I just love it.
Now you've been in Atlanta for almost a month
Mm-hmm.
as part of the bridge residency between ADAMA and our team. We'll get to that in a little bit. You're trying Atlanta, but I kind of want to still unpack how you began to dive deep into the hip hop scene in Accra. And I know you have a couple of platforms that you're really sort of steering, navigating. Yes, yoyo tinz
Yeah.
and
This no be
this one, yes, yes. So like unpack how you sort of migrated, and landed in Accra and began to immerse yourself in that.
Okay. So when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to do something around culture, media, and arts. So I was lucky enough that I found a master's degree in that, a bachelor degree in that area, and I continued in a master's degree more around intercultural communication. So that's when it goes back to language
Yeah.
and trying to see how to communicate in an environment that is not your own or how to navigate certain places. So having that background, I knew that I wanted to work on the continent and in the art sector. So I had the opportunity to do an internship that was part of the curriculum for my master's, and I got a nice opportunity in Accra. I got there, knowing that from Paris 2013, I didn't have many images of what was going on the continent. So I had gone to Accra once, but like 2006 or something like that with my parents. So we mainly did like touristic stuff and going to the restaurant. So I really didn't have any idea of the art scene. I tried to Google some few things, but 2013 you couldn't really see much. I was not on Instagram at that time, so I went with no idea. The only thing I did was to go to an exhibition in Paris that was about funerals. Ghana is big on funerals. So that's the only thing that I had. The fascination, sort of, Ghana for funerals and death. So there was a parallel that was made with all the horror movies. And there's a lot of painters in Ghana who recreate the posters themselves. So that's the idea I had though. Okay, so people like funerals, and they're very talented painters who will produce movie posters. That's basically all I had. So I got to Ghana and my mind was just blown. So I was in Alliance Française, which is like the French cultural center. And you have to imagine that it was approximately 2 events per week. So like back to back, poetry, sculpture, exhibition, music, like everything you can imagine. We did we even did some gala dinners. Like it was a wide array of events, and all imagined by Accra creatives. So it's just crazy to have this no image and to arrive and to discover that actually there's way more that I could have even imagined. So yeah, that's how I got to be in the creative scene and to know that I don't want to leave. Like I want to see how I can impact And my strength is being able to navigate several spaces, but also everything that is admin. Even though there's very talented creatives, they don't necessarily have the skills in terms of like budgets and stuff like that. Just Excel, or even sometimes when they are very upcoming or beginners, even emails. Sometimes the structure of the email will be just very random. Right? So that's how I started writing. But that was also part of my job description. And then I met Selo, my partner, and he was at the inception of yo-yo tinz. So yo-yo is a word people would call hip hop because of yo.
Oh, okay, okay.
And
The next, all right.
and tinz is basically things.
Yeah.
So things of hip hop. And so the idea for him was to have a platform that would be solely dedicated to hip hop. Because even though hip hop exists, it's not there's no venue or place or platform where you will have only 100% hip hop. It will be like it's a concert and then there's a hip hop artist, there's a soul artist, there's a like it's very mixed. So the idea was really to give a platform, but also for people who are interested in the culture to know more, to have all the various elements and to understand that it's a wide movement and that is not only rap, but there's like DJing, graffiti, etc. etc. So yeah, we started working 2013 on that with the very first event, and then we continued. We are still active now. 2018 we did the first festival, so that was the first ever hip hop festival. Again, the same way there were no platforms, there were no festivals solely dedicated to hip hop culture. So that's what we did. 2019 too, and then COVID hit, and around that time. I had also acquired the knowledge of creating art exhibition in my position in process. So I was very much interested at the same time in hip hop culture and in contemporary art. So I decided that the work I'm able to do behind the scenes for hip hop artists, I can also do for visual artists. So I set up this Nobi Art, which is just to encourage people to collect art, but also for artists to know how to sell. And if you are not in a gallery in Accra, which there are not many, it's very difficult for the Kenyan artists to sell their work. So I just started doing some pop-up events and think about the exhibition, creating catalogs, working on their bios, just things like that. So that's what I continue to do, what I'm also doing with the sense.
When do you sleep?
That's a good question.
I mean, that's also amazing, but it makes me think about like the origin story, like the origin story for hip hop in Accra, because I think in the States, like we grow up in a culture where you see the evolution of hip hop from jazz, from funk, from disco, and you see like generationally how that evolves into this thing that started, in the Bronx and kind of evolved into other places. And in the South, it looks different. In the West, it looks different. But like we kind of live with the fluidity of the origin story. So if you could maybe like unpack what that same type of evolution is like for hip hop in Accra, because I think for us, we see it as hip hop is a thing that we have exported around the world, and now everyone kind of gets to make it their own.
Yeah.
But there's still some things that are very specific to those places that inform it. So unpack that a little bit.
Okay, so the first time hip hop got to Accra, it was people who had the opportunity to travel and would come back with cassettes. And so some bands started to imitate what was done in the US. So that's the very beginning. That will be in the 90s. And so the artists will solely rap in English. Then there's some evolution where the sound will change. And so there will be a fusion with a high life sound, which is like some traditional music from the 60s, 70s, and it will be blended with hip hop. And this movement was called hip life.
Okay.
So while the sound is evolving, the way people are rapping is also evolving. They will start rapping in local languages. They will start including more pidgin, which is kind of a Creole. And then it just continued. Nowadays, what can I say? There's rap in almost all the languages that you can find in Ghana. There's some people who still stick a lot to like Western sound. There are some people who are trying to sound more African, but there's also a lot of artists who are very versatile. So they are able to do like a whole 100% high life album, and then the next year a whole 100% hip hop album. So I think people have embraced the versatility and the multiplicity of their identity, and they're able to be very comfortable with that.
Yeah. What that signals to me is this notion of music as a diasporic space, right? We're talking, this is in the ADAMA Salon. I think the word diaspora is very critical to that. We're in the music store. Shout out to Moves Music. You know, music is, I think, a very diasporic element in how we connect to one another. But beyond that, like if you think about the movement of Black bodies from the continent to the States, right? And then for us in this place to then create something that then travels back, right? And so you have like this generation of how, you know, people, bodies, and now culture is now moving and not intersecting. I think that's just really amazing to sort of like unpack. But I want to ask you about discoverability, because I think when you mention these different, like the fabric of how the culture is being developed in Accra, I'm wondering, well, how do we begin to understand who's doing what, plug into their movements? And so I'm thinking about infrastructure. You know, here, you know, you have folks who do their mixtapes and, you know, 3 or 4 mixtapes, they build their audience. You might get picked up, you do some festivals, you know, you sort of see that expand. What does the infrastructure look like in Accra?
It's definitely less developed. But artists have understood the power of streaming platform. So they really do a lot in putting their music out there. Then I always have this frustration that when an album is released, I don't think that enough is done around it. So the album will be released, maybe you get to do one show and then that's it, you know? So there's not this idea that, oh, I'm going on media tour. The media are not really even trained to know how to talk about hip hop. And again, there's no specific media where you will go except for our platform where we will do maybe an interview, some articles, but even that we are limited. It's a small team. So yeah, it's tough. It's really tough.
And then I wonder if there are other cities that artists are relying on to then sort of expand discoverability. So I'm thinking about one of my favorite artists, who is a British artist but is Ghanaian by heritage, Koje Radical.
Yeah.
Favorite artist, one of my favorite artists. But I discovered him by listening to BBC One Extra.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, who is this artist? And then I started to do my homework. But that's part of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking about, you know, what other cities or other you know, steps are artists sort of identifying as ways to expand what they can, you know, how they can build their audience.
It's still very limited. Like it's rare for an artist to go to the 16 regions, like to do a tour in the 16 region of Ghana. It's more likely that an artist will maybe get signed on a big label that will give him the opportunity to travel outside the continent, yes, rather than be able first to develop the audience in all the cities. And I think for art and culture, it's still very centered around Accra, even though there are some pockets like maybe Kumasi, Takoradi, that are a bit active, but it's still very, very centered on the capital. There's things happening, but again, that would be, there's a number of festivals that have emerged now.
Yeah.
So definitely artists who are making noise will be invited to headline those festivals. But again, that's not a festival that is mainly a hip hop festival. And also, even if you have audience through streaming platform, okay, you have listeners all over the world, but then what do you do with it? You know, it still stays quite limited. So we are aware, we are very aware of it. The artists are very aware of it. But so far we don't really have the structure in place to fight back and to empower more the artists. It's not the priority of the government. Like there's a Ministry of Arts, Culture and Tourism. Even though they support a lot those big festivals, it's still not at a point where there's a lot of investment for infrastructures to be built. Yeah.
So let's bring you to Atlanta and let's unpack, you know, your bridge residency experience. From what I can tell, you've had a pretty, you know, whirlwind, you know, tour of the city.
Yeah.
You've gotten to MODA, you've gotten to the Trap Music Museum,
Yes.
gotten to the High Museum,
Yeah.
you've gotten to, what am I missing? You missed a couple.
What have I done?
Fahamu Studio for sure.
Definitely.
Yes. Where else?
I think I visited like 9 or 10 artists, so 10 studio visits.
And you did the Jeezy DJ Drama
Yes.
beat, which is, I'm still upset that I was not there. So
I got lucky.
yeah. So with all that being said, first impressions of Atlanta, or just like what you've gathered in your travels and your conversations and your sort of immersion into this place.
First of all, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I was reflecting on it a couple of days ago, and I realized that, like, can you imagine how it feels that I've been writing this project for some time now, and to have people who really believe in it and who really understand what I want to do, I'm very lucky, I think, and I'm very grateful for that experience. So I want to mention that as a first. And now I forgot your question.
Atlanta, let's just take us through your first impressions of your time here, the things that you've seen. I know, especially if you're talking about your work as a curator at the intersection of hip hop and Black masculinity, like sort of how has Atlanta began to like inform some of your earlier thoughts?
So when I did this project, I was first thinking of Accra, obviously, because that's where I was based. And then I realized that, well, in Accra, nobody will help me with my research. Even though I work with very good photographers, like I can refer you to the ADAMA conversation we had 2 weeks ago, which is online. So I had a conversation with Ofwe and Selom J, who are 2 hip-hop archival photographers I work with. So outside us, nobody is really helping with the research, or like I don't have much resources. So I understood that I should try and export my project to where I could have access to research space, or maybe to write-ups, etc., etc. So I have this proposal that is ready, and then I just had Faham contact me and say that he might have an interesting opportunity for me. And so I thought that, that's the way for me to explore my project in another city. Knowing that I didn't know anything about Atlanta. I didn't know much about Atlanta. And so coming to Atlanta and to realize that, wow, there couldn't have been any better place to actually do this work. It's just crazy. It's just amazing. And so first of all, I had one first experience in the US, but in Oregon. So
not Atlanta.
Not Atlanta, no. So
not Atlanta.
I couldn't picture a Black city. Like that's not, of course I lived in Accra, but that's a continent. But in a Western country, I've never pictured a Black city. So that's I don't know if you can, I don't know how to say, I don't know even how to say it, because that's something I couldn't even imagine. And then to meet so many creatives in such a short time, and so many creatives will also understand what I'm trying to talk about, because that's their day-to-day life. That's questions they ask themselves. It's just, yeah, the right place at the right moment, really. And also it's my comfort zone. I love being around creatives, and I love being in a dynamic city. So it just made the work very easier.
So, in terms of infrastructure that we have here, or some of the creative conversations that you've had up to this point, what are a couple of the things that stand out?
For me, it was very interesting to meet, for example, a photographer. I went to meet Melissa Phyllis Hiller on Instagram, and she would say, "I am hip hop." So for me, it's really interesting. Like, I don't really think I had these encounters before, where somebody who was not actively a hip hop artist, like graffiti artist, rapper, DJ, etc., who would say, "I am hip hop." That's something I hadn't really witnessed before. And also, I kind of see that there's no real age barrier. That could be somebody who is 50 who's coming to me and telling me I am hip hop, or that could be somebody who's 16. So that's also something that is changing in my worldview, because in Accra, I will be working with my partner Essenam. He will point out to somebody and he will say, "Oh, this guy is a banker, but he used to be a rapper." So it's like, "Oh, he passed 30, so the hip hop career is finished. He has to do something else, you know?" So I couldn't also project and see so many people who still relate to the culture after a certain age. It's like, I'm hip hop till I die, basically. And I also, yeah, I think it changed my view on a lot of things.
I'm hip hop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I think in speaking about the origin story of the culture, when I mentioned that earlier, when you grow up in a place where everything feels native to you, and you sort of see the evolution of it from your parents' record collection, right? And you understand where it came from, and you understand where you fit into that. I think it fosters a space where everyone, even if you have a different profession, you're never removed from the culture. And I think that's the beautiful thing about hip hop, and hopefully continues to be the beautiful thing about hip hop, is that it's bigger than what your actual like job title says it is.
I think it's because in Accra there's not yet, I can only talk about Accra, I can't say the whole of Ghana. I think because there's not yet this deep understanding of what hip hop is, people will tend to feel like, oh, it's something for teenagers, it's something for young people. So I can't reconcile it with maturity or with having so many responsibility. So it's still a conversation that we have to have, so people don't have to forget a whole part of their life to have a 9 to 5. You can totally have your 9 to 5 and still remain very active in the culture. I think, yeah, but it will come. It will come.
Are there anything else? Are there any other things, excuse me, about your Atlanta trip that you've been learning, again, either about yourself or the city, or just what you want to bring back to Accra in terms of either conversations or just things that you've sort of gathered along the way?
I'm always interested in collaboration. When I first conceptualized this project, I was mainly thinking about photography and video. So like doing research to later on do an exhibition, right? But I've met painters here who, for me, just like Fahamu, for example, who for me also work a lot around the elements of the culture. So I'm kind of rethinking that maybe my exhibition shouldn't only be so easy, but more trying to navigate more various art forms. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, like, my statement was that I believe in the power of image in your identity construction. But I think the power of words is also very important. So as I said, when I met Melissa and she said, I am hip hop, the first thing that I thought was like, oh, I wish I had recorded that. So I think I would also want to incorporate some sound elements, definitely. And then I really think that it's a project that I would want to be itinerant. So obviously there will be a component in Accra. Now I will incorporate Atlanta. I'm going to Paris, so I will also incorporate Paris. But basically that's a project that could be a lifelong project and that I could do everywhere where there's a strong Black community. So yeah, it just opened many doors, and I'm really excited about that.
I want to go back to this notion of language and expression and what that provides, because I think when we talk about the origins and even the current sort of state of hip hop here, there's always this place where this intersection of Blackness and language that provides comfort. People have the space to express what is meaningful to them, whatever that might be, and that's persisted since the inception of the culture. And so when you talk about hip hop still being somewhat younger in Accra, or it's still being a thing that is like off to the side, what I'm wondering is what are the things that people are expressing, in terms of like what's important to them? But then outside of hip hop, if we're talking about it being a thing that could be sort of pushed here, like where are people expressing those things? Like how does that, like where does that lane of expression and Blackness and language live typically in Accra?
That's a problem. That's, I think, why I thought about that project, because there's no specific space where Blackness, identity construction is really discussed. I have a friend who has started doing those conversations about toxic masculinities and how to acknowledge when men are being toxic and how to create better relationships. So that's one space, but that's the only one that comes to mind at the moment. So that's really the inception of the project, like to realize that no, it's not possible that the way I feel sometimes men are not feeling the same. And so how do they communicate about it? And also for me being a Black woman to really fulfill myself and being in a heterosexual relationship, and that's all I know. So I'm talking from that point of view. But I believe that for me to be balanced, my partner also needs to be balanced. So it's not that if you are feminist, you shouldn't forget that, okay, if we are strong, we can only be strong if the other part is also strong, right? Most of our problem as women, we see it coming from patriarchy, right? But how do we debunk patriarchy if we don't see how men actually acknowledge that they are perpetuating some patriarchal behaviors, right? So it's complex, but basically I realize that there's no really spaces where men have this conversation. So it's time to see what are a comfortable place that could be some kind of a safe space for Black men. So for me, I thought that was hip hop culture for people in my environment, people I know. So how in the hip hop movement can we create this conversation? How can we look back at what has been created and see the negative effects, but also how can we create new things? How can we highlight what has been done that is portraying a better image and that could offer space for conversation to grow together and to grow in the better version of ourselves, basically.
You spoke about Lauryn Hill and Nas being one of like your earliest memories. And when you talk about the spaces that you're trying to create there, I'm wondering where is this, so let me unpack two of those things. So your earliest memories of hip hop coming from this place, traveling to where you are, so much of hip hop is very much geography. Like we are able to map our communities through the music. If someone says, I'm on Helen and Delo, I can go to that intersection in Atlanta and stand there and imagine what might have been happening in the song, right? So I'm wondering, if you're talking about the spaces that you're trying to create there and the critique for the patriarchy, is there also space to maybe critique what you've received from us in terms of the past generations of the culture? Because if you're consuming it, could you just maybe shed like some light on how you're critiquing what has been imported, you know, in that type of way?
That would be for me all this idea that it's mainly in the rap elements of hip hop culture, but that would be all these notions that you have to have a certain street credibility. So if you haven't committed any crimes, then you're not really it. If you have to look a certain way, like to be masculine, you have to be very masculine, and you have to be always surrounded by so many women who are always kind of half naked, and you're always flaunting how much money you have. You are always grinding, always busy. So the counterpart would be being at rest, showing your actual family, because all these women, we know that at the end of the video, like they go home and you go your way. They are not coming with you at home. So showing your family, showing just being relaxed, showing the kind of conversation you have with friends and family, showing you as a member of your community, because we know that the money artists make, they use it to impact their communities. So we don't really see much of this community work. You're looking so nice. So how did that happen? You went to the barber shop. You had this time, this particular self-care time. We don't see it. What do you eat? I love food. So that's like one of my number one question. I never see you eating. What do you eat? Like we all eat. What do you eat? Do you read? Like, and when you read, what do you read? All those moments that it's probably even a bigger portion of your life than what we see. So why is there this imbalance? Because that's all you do behind closed doors that makes you write what you write or rap about what you rap. So can't we just shift and have a bit more balance and have as much as those images and the one that probably you didn't even have any artistic direction, like you didn't have any power in the projection of these images. So can we try and work together and produce images that reflect more who you are, and that also can be inspirational, so people don't feel so eager to get to something that is actually just fake.
Yeah, I love that. I mentioned Jeezy earlier. I know on Jeezy's new album, he actually has a song called Street Cred, where he sort of talks about like the limits of street cred, and someone who's, you know, has a certain narrative, but like he actually kind of begins to like unpack how that is not always the thing that needs to perhaps be the most currency, right? But and to your point, we hear artists for, you know, 4 minutes. We get to hear 4 minutes of your life on a song. The other, you know, 23 hours, you know, plus of that, you know, there are other things that are happening that, you know, are probably just as fascinating if you were to allow us into those spaces. So I think that's a really interesting and I think necessary take on it. Fahamu, how are we on time, sir? Okay. I did want to go back to this notion of how hip hop maps space, because here, you know, historically we've had Southern rap, we've had West Coast rap, East Coast, Midwest, and all of, you know, a lot of the artists are helping you understand their spaces wherever they grew up through the music. So you get to live through them in that type of way. I'm wondering, when it comes to the artists that are based in Accra, you know, how do we get to learn Accra, you know, through their music? And is there a similar mapping of that space as a geography through the culture?
I'm not that sure. Let me think about it. The first thing that comes to mind right now would be Mensa's first album, which was titled Number One Mongo Street. And so that's a street in a community called Dansoman. And the short name for Dansoman community is DC. And there's a number of rappers who come from this area. But I wouldn't be able to say that the sound is very distinctive. The only thing that could be reference to the area is the name of the album, the name of the streets that he mentioned, maybe some few landmarks, but that's it. I feel like it's more a visual, a sonic representation of the whole of Ghana, kind of.
Okay.
But also, you know, our borders are so artificial that the relationship to geography is also different. You know, it has been imposed on us and we still don't really own it that much. So
say more about that.
So for example, I'm from the Ewe group, but I'm from Togo, right? And my partner is also from the Ewe group, but he's from Ghana. So if our parents meet, they can speak the same language, but then they don't. There's a lot of references that are totally different because just a border was put in between of a group. So you would probably more have references in the music that are linked to your group than your actual geography. Even though it's still a geography, like we could redo the maps with the groups, kind of.
Yeah.
And so I think the music relates more to your group. Yeah.
I mentioned the word discoverability earlier, and I think in the way that you came here and you got a chance to sort of dive into Atlanta culture and discover some of the things that we have here. How would we begin to discover, all the artists that you're working with, or those platforms or those different opportunities? Because I think for us, music being such a diasporic space, and everyone likes to be up on like the latest and the freshest, newest thing, right? So like, how do we begin to discover some of the artists that come from that region?
Go on our platform.
Yeah.
Go on Yoyo Tinz
Yeah.
Instagram page, but also we're on Spotify now. So we've realized that there's really a lot of interest. So we will make sure to update regularly. And then once, the algorithm, once you start listening to one artist, then it will just propose more artists. But I think it's also just about being curious and very intentional and doing a bit of research. And because right now almost everybody is online.
Yeah.
So just if you see one track that you like and there's a featuring on it, you just check the artist that is featured and then it just continues. But yeah, I think we are at a time where we are very lucky. It's not our parents' time. We really have way more access. So I feel like it's pretty easy.
So is that, you said on Spotify, is that a playlist, or is that?
So we have a page,
okay.
YOYOTINZ. There are podcasts on there too, podcasts that have been made with hip-hop artists, Ghanaian hip-hop artists mainly. So that's also a way to learn more about them. And it's not only learning about their music, but more who they are and how they came about their various projects. So that's also a nice way to go about it. On YouTube, there's also a number of playlists, a number of artists who are active there. Instagram, similar. Everybody is also trying TikTok. So
Sure.
Yeah, I think if you put some keywords like Ghanaian hip hop or Yoyo Tinz, because when we publish, we also always put our hashtag Yoyo Tinz. You can find quite a number of things.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm sure there's some questions either online or from the folks who are in our live studio audience. But one of the things I wanted to ask as we transition into that space, I think there's always this assumed moment of how you recognize things that feel different and things that feel the same when folks from the continent and African Americans sort of are in conversation with one another. So I want to know, for you coming to Atlanta and it being so Black compared to Oregon, what felt familiar to you when you got here? Like, was there anything that was like, man, like I know I'm far from home, but like this feels familiar, this feels warm?
A lot of things.
Okay.
The faces. Like I have a picture with an artist I went to visit in her studio, and I was looking at the picture. I would be like, "You look like my cousin. Like we could be related, really." So that's a first thing. Then the body language, the attitude, the kissing your teeth. That's all of this. And also, Accra is very much a city that is developing. So and very rapidly. So even the high rises, some part of the city could look like a business center of Accra. Yeah, so it looks like a bigger, more developed version of Accra. The differences, the food maybe, and the sound. I kind of miss the noise. I kind of miss Accra noise.
Oh.
Usually I complain about it, but I think I miss it now.
I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Like the honking, the music on the streets. Yeah, I think I'm missing that a bit.
Man, I love that. Questions from the audience?
I do have a question because I am so fascinated sort of building on this relationship to Africans on the continent and then those of us in the diaspora, particularly in America, because Blackness here, American Blackness is probably like one of the greatest inventions in the culture that's come out as a result of it, and hip hop being sort of like the nucleus of that, right? And then for you to take this thing and then embrace it, like, are there any conversations just even about that, like how that has had to emerge as part of our survival in a lot of ways, making sense of our own pain and trauma, and then what is that conversation? If there's a conversation.
No, I don't think. Oh, sorry.
I don't know if the audience caught that. I'm going to try to repeat Heather's question as best I can. Heather talked about sort of framed her question around this notion of being Black in America and that identity and that as a form of identity that comes out of pain, trauma, and it's something that is uniquely American, but is also exported around the world. And so I think what Heather was trying to get at, right, is, how are you unpacking that identity as you have been here?
Yeah.
Cool.
I personally have a better understanding. So being in Accra, December is a time where a lot of people from the diaspora come to Accra. So last December, that was the case. A lot of people came. There was Chance the Rapper, there was Vic Mensa, and there was Ari Lennox. And just to give you an example, there was an incident with Ari Lennox because she was very vocal about her experience and how it meant so much for her to be on the continent, to be on the motherland, to go to the sea, to go to the slave castle, and how it was healing for her. And how it was very emotional, and she found herself really often crying and just connecting with her emotions. And she was bullied online. Like, people wouldn't understand. Like, I wouldn't go to that extent, but me, myself, sometimes were like, but why are they over the top? Like, we understand. Like, you've gone through something, but is it that deep? Still, we don't know, like we don't have those conversations, so it's difficult to relate. It went to an extreme, of course, and we can't accept the way it happened. It was very traumatic for her, and it's very unfortunate. But there's a need to have those conversations. When you're on the continent, born and raised on the continent, it's not a question you think about. You don't really think about how tough it is to be a Black American and how it's generational trauma. Because even on the continent, we don't really talk about trauma. We don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge much feelings. So it's very difficult when you don't know how to acknowledge your own feelings to now try to understand somebody else's feeling. And then the history is also maybe not well taught. So that also creates even more disconnect. I wanted to mention something else and it's gone.
Well, I'll just say this also, I think that our digital platforms sometimes allow us to be not as understanding of one another. Like online, it's easy to really become contentious with one another. And I think the folks who treated Ari in that type of way probably wouldn't have done that if they were talking to her like directly,
definitely,
right?
Definitely.
So I think sometimes the platform fosters a sense of just difficulty.
Another thing is that you have to understand that all the images we get from the US, it's only success, money, very, it seems like life is good in the US. So why are you complaining and why are you talking about your trauma when you seem to have a good life anyway? Like, why do you complain? We have 30% inflation right now. We don't know how to eat. So why are you crying that? Like, I'm exaggerating and it's not my voice, but I'm just trying to imagine what could have gone through somebody's mind. Like maybe, yeah.
Any other questions? Mom, do we have anything online? Okay. How much time do we have left? Are we good? Oh, okay. We are wrapping up very soon. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I know you've had a range of experiences in Atlanta, and this time with you feels extremely precious. And I want to thank you for all of your work, sharing with us today, and for hopefully allowing us to maybe bridge, this is the Bridge residency, hopefully allowing us to sort of bridge our communities and our cultures. And so I'll give you the last word on today. Is there any thoughts that you may have about Atlanta, Accra, the residency, any of that?
Well, thank you so much for your question. I think it was a very interesting conversation, and you made me go back in time and just have some deep reflection. I really enjoyed that, and I think it's necessary. I would love to continue the conversation. Basically, I think it's just the start of something, and I hope it will continue, and that we'll be able to have more platforms where we can have this very necessary conversation. And thank you for everybody who showed up. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you know what? I got one more question.
Okay.
What did your brother think of the work that you're doing now?
My big brother?
Yeah.
I'll ask him.
Yeah, because I just know, his love of hip hop sort of helped you start that journey. So I'm wondering just, what he thinks of the work that you're doing now. So
I will ask him.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.